My name's Sam Hardy. I like to think of myself as a pracademic, so I'm a practitioner and an academic in the field of conflict resolution. I teach in master's programs in conflict management and resolution in different universities across Australia and in Hong Kong and the United States. And I also practice as a mediator, a conflict coach, a facilitator and an ombudsman. I'm talking with you today about the work that I've done in the field of conflict coaching, sometimes called conflict management coaching, and my background in that area is particularly in developing the real conflict coaching system, and I'm also a principal of Conflict Coaching International. The conflict management process that I use is called Real Conflict Coaching, and it's a conflict management process that's based on one-on-one conflict support for a person in conflict. The Real Conflict Coaching system is based on a philosophy of four things, and they are the things that the letters REAL in REAL stand for. The first one is a philosophy of reflection, in the sense that we want the process of conflict coaching to be one in which the client reflects on the conflict situation, their role in it, and where they might want to go from here. The second philosophical underpinning is engagement. We want to encourage our clients to engage constructively with conflict rather than just avoid it because it seems easier to do so. The third philosophical underpinning is artistry, and that means basically that we want our clients to aspire to artistry, to do better than just be average conflict managers of their situation. We want them to aim for something better than, just something that will do. And the final principle is L for learning, and that is because the process of conflict coaching is a process of learning. It's not learning in the sense that the coach is teaching the client something, but more that the client is learning from their own experiences and from the process of going through the conflict coaching system about themselves, about other people, about conflict, about where they manage it, and also about how they might manage conflict in the future. So the purpose of conflict coaching, particularly the real conflict coaching system, is to help clients develop the 5 C's. And the 5 C's stand for clarity. We want to help our clients become clearer about their conflict situation, to really make sure that they've had a good look at all the information that's available to them. The second C stands for comprehension. And that means that we want the client to really understand the situation that they find themselves in, to understand, how they got into this mess, and to understand a bit better some of the choices that they might have in getting out of it. And that leads directly to the third C, which is choices. People in conflict often don't realise that they have made choices along the way in this situation that have contributed in some way to where they are now. What they also tend not to understand is that they have choices about what to do in the future. At the very least, they have 2 choices: do something or do nothing. And if they choose to do something, there are usually infinite variations of what sorts of somethings they could do. So our job as a conflict coach is to support them to identify and evaluate choices that they've made in the past and that they might make in the future. The fourth 4 stands for competence. We want to help our clients improve their competence in managing conflict. And we do that by giving them an opportunity to think about ways that they could improve their conflict management skills, a safe environment to practice, having different conversations, to think about different ways that they might try managing situations in the future. And the 5th C stands for confidence. And we hope that our clients not only develop a better understanding of the situation, better understanding of their choices and better skills to manage it, that they go away with some confidence that they can do something to improve their situation and that they're willing to give it a go. So generally speaking, on a practical level, how the process works. The process involves an intake session where the coach would meet with the client, talk to them about conflict coaching, and together they'd make a bit of an assessment of whether conflict coaching would suit their needs in this particular situation, and to make sure that there were no particular risks of engaging in conflict coaching at that time for that client. If that intake session led to an agreement being reached that conflict coaching would proceed, then the coach and the client would meet for one or more coaching sessions subsequently in which the actual conflict coaching would take place. And once a coaching relationship closes because the client perhaps has resolved the conflict or feels that they're now able to manage it without the support of a coach, we would usually have an exit session where we kind of wrap up the whole coaching process and make sure the client was ready to sort of go off into the world on their own again. In the actual coaching sessions, there are a sequence of stages, and I'll basically just list them off. If you want to learn how to do this in more detail and understand actually what happens in each part of the coaching session, you can do the conflict coaching subject and you'll get to know how to do this very well. But the stages in each coaching session basically go like this. The first stage is goal setting, where we ask the client to set some goals for the session, what they want to achieve during this coaching session. We then spend some time talking about what's been happening in relation to this conflict matter that the client's come to see me about. After we've got a fair amount of detail about what's been happening, I'll talk with the client about why the situation matters to them. What's the impact that this situation is having on their lives? So we do a bit of an evaluation of the impact of the situation. The next stage is looking at a variety of perspectives, and so people in conflict often come in just with their own point of view, their own perspective. So this is where I would ask the client to start thinking about the situation from other people's perspectives, the other person involved in the conflict, other people who might be impacted by or observing the conflict. Then we move to a part in the coaching session where we start thinking about the future. And the next stage is where I ask the client to start imagining a preferred future. What would they like the situation to be like if this conflict was managed well or resolved? If possible, we might then move to developing some action steps that the client can implement subsequent to the coaching session. So actual things they can do or try to see if it makes the situation better. The second last stage in a coaching session is a stage called reflection, which is where I ask the client to think back over the coaching session and to talk a little bit about what they've learnt in the session and how they're feeling about the coaching in general. And the last stage in the process is closure, where we basically summarise the session, make sure the client is clear about what they're going to do next, and effectively wrap up the coaching session for that day. Conflict coaching can be used in almost any conflict situation where a person would like some help to manage the conflict better themselves. Coaching can be used as a standalone process, or it can be used in conjunction with another process or other processes. For example, conflict coaching can be used as a way to help someone decide which conflict resolution process would be best suited for their conflict. It can also be used prior to mediation or prior to another conflict resolution process as a way to help someone prepare to participate most effectively. Conflict coaching can also be used post-mediation or post another conflict resolution process to help someone implement any agreement reached or to manage any ongoing issues in a constructive way. There are some situations in which conflict coaching is not suited, and these tend to revolve around areas in which a person might be at risk of violence, bullying or intimidation. So matters where there's a family conflict involving family violence, or workplace matters where there are serious allegations of bullying are probably not going to be suitable for conflict coaching, as in those cases people really need the support of somebody who can intervene on their behalf, and it may not be safe for them to try and manage the situation alone. So the main benefit of conflict coaching is that it's a one-on-one confidential relationship between the client and the coach. And the coach can provide the client with a safe space to really open up about the conflict and to examine their own contributions to the situation in a safe and non-judgmental environment. In conflict coaching, the client makes all the decisions. The coach doesn't ever give advice or make suggestions, so the client really is in control. It's actually surprising how much a client can do themselves to improve and even resolve a conflict situation when they have time to think through it in a structured and productive way. Clients often incidentally develop conflict management skills that they can implement in their lives in the future in relation to other conflict situations. So the impact of conflict coaching often extends far beyond the original conflict for which the client sought support. So to give you a little bit of a run through of the process, I have already introduced the kind of various stages, but in terms of who participates, in the actual coaching session, the only people who are participating are the coach and the client. But prior to a coaching relationship commencing, it's often the case that the coach may need to meet with the client's employer, particularly if the client's employer is the one paying the bill, if they've referred one of their staff members for coaching. And the reason the coach might need to speak to the employer first is to clarify the expectations of the employer for the coaching, what the employer is expecting to change as a result of the client being coached. And it's also important that the coach explain to the employer the roles and the fact that the conversations between the employee and the coach will be completely confidential. The roles of the client and the coach in the coaching process. Basically, the coach helps the client to work through the real conflict coaching system, and they do this by inviting the client to talk about different aspects of the conflict. The coach listens very carefully to what the client says and asks a lot of open-ended, non-directive questions to help the client to elaborate and consider the situation more carefully. In terms of outcomes, the aim or the objective of a coaching process really depends on the client. And you might remember that I said earlier, at the start of every coaching session, the coach asks the client to identify a goal for the session, or something along the lines of what the client would like to achieve in this particular coaching session. And that ends up being the goal for the coaching session. Now, the goal might be anything from the client wanting to have a clearer understanding of the situation to the client planning what to say in a meeting with the person they're in conflict with that's coming up in the next couple of weeks. It really depends on the client. Conflict coaching was developed as a result of two distinct areas of practice, and that is executive coaching and mediation. So the actual concept of conflict coaching was developed actually in Australia, in Adelaide, by a man who ran a university mediation service for students in conflict. What the staff of that mediation service found was that very often only one of the students turned up for the mediation, and staff started to wonder what they could do to help these students when the other person didn't turn up and they couldn't conduct the mediation. So what they developed was a process that they started off calling problem solving for one, or mediation for one. And basically they would run through a kind of mediation-like process, but just with one party. And that developed into something a little bit more tailored and structured called conflict coaching or conflict management coaching. At the same time that mediators were trying to develop some kind of service that would help an individual rather than two people, executive coaches or leadership coaches who were providing sort of general coaching for often senior managers or CEOs or people in fairly high-powered situations, these coaches started to realise that many of the things that their clients wanted to support with were actually conflict situations. That was the thing that they were most often asked to help with. And so those two things kind of combined. You had the skill of executive leadership coaches combining with the skill of mediators, and together they created a particular coaching process specifically aimed at supporting people in conflict situations. To a certain extent, the conflict coaching process is flexible or adaptable. And in one sense, it really should be tailored to the particular client's needs. A good example of where this might be necessary is when a client comes to see you and they need coaching very urgently. So they only have an hour in which they have to figure out what to do in a meeting that's coming up in an hour's time. If you only have an hour to work with a client, you may not have time to go through every single stage in the real conflict coaching system. A client may not have time to give you in great detail the entire history leading up to this interaction that's happening in an hour's time, and they might need to get right to the action planning part of the process because they have to have a plan in 60 minutes. So to a certain extent, you can adapt the process to meet the client's particular needs. However, having said that, doing that is not ideal. The stages in the process are designed and in a particular order for a particular reason, and the process works best and clients are best supported to make really good choices if there's enough time to work through each of the stages in the appropriate order. I would say that there are 4 main skills that are fundamentally important for conflict coaches. The first skill is the ability to build rapport with people. For coaching to work really well, the client has to really trust you. They have to be really comfortable being very open, very honest, and really sharing sometimes quite deep and personal information with you. So if you're the sort of coach who can make people feel very comfortable, willing to be open, to tell you sometimes their dirty little secrets or things that they're not very proud of, then the coaching is much more likely to be effective. So the ability to build rapport with people, and sometimes people who are being quite challenging to work with because they're angry and upset and in conflict situations. Being able to work with those people calmly and non-judgmentally is very, very important. The second main skill I think of a conflict coach is the ability to interact with somebody without using any directive language. So really being completely facilitative in the way that you interact with the client. Really emphasising and highlighting in your use of language, in your use of body language, in the way that you frame questions, that the choices are all being left up to the client, that you're not making any kind of hidden suggestions or giving advice in an indirect kind of way. Really highlighting at every opportunity that it's the client's choice. The client needs to decide what to do, that it's the client's responsibility. So using non-directive language is really important. The third skill that I think is really important for a conflict coach is excellent listening skills. And listening as a conflict coach is listening at a completely different level to what you might generally listen to people in an everyday conversation. You have to listen to what's being said, but more importantly, you have to listen for what's not being said. You need to have the ability to listen for clues that there might be some more information, or that the client might be brushing over something, or that there might be something else going on that the client's not talking about, or may even not be really paying attention to. So really being able to listen in a way that listens for more than just what the client's saying, but what the client might not be saying. And the last skill I think that's really important for a conflict coach is excellent questioning skills. You need to be able to question a client in a way that's supportive and non-directive, that the client doesn't feel like they're being interrogated or challenged, but that you're helping the client elaborate, think more carefully, and you're helping the client question themselves a little bit in a way that they don't feel threatened by. So questioning skills are also fundamentally important. A number of different organisations in Australia provide conflict coach training. 2 of the main models that are taught in Australia are the Synergy conflict management coaching model and the Real conflict coaching system. People can be accredited as conflict coaches through Synergy and through Conflict Coaching International using the Real conflict coaching system. In Australia, conflict coaching is probably most commonly used in the workplace. So many organisations have what's called an employee assistance program, which provides certain services to all staff of an organisation in a private and confidential manner. Those services would typically include things like confidential counselling, mediation services, and these days quite often conflict coaching. Conflict coaching is also used in family conflict. So conflict coaching is starting to be used more often to prepare parents who are going to go to mediation to deal with issues around joint parenting after separation. Conflict coaching is starting to be used as a process to help prepare those parents to engage more effectively in family dispute resolution or family mediation. It's also starting to be used as a bit of a pilot with those parents post family dispute resolution. So after they've been through a process of family mediation and they've made parenting orders, conflict coaching is being used to support those parents to implement those orders. Sometimes despite having an agreement, actually putting them into action can be quite difficult for people. So conflict coaching can be used as a way to help people monitor how things are going and to try and keep things on track after they've reached an agreement.